Welcome to our episode of Biblical Archaeology from the Ground Down. Sponsored by Bible Interact and hosted by Dr. George Sparks. Today's special guest is experienced field archaeologist Dr. David E. Graves. Now let's explore the field of archaeology in today's episode.
Well, good morning, good evening, good afternoon. This is Biblical Archaeology from the Ground Down, sponsored by Bible Interact. My special guest today is Dr. David Graves. We are going to talk about somebody evil. Evil-Merodach, is that it?
Evil-Merodach.
Marduk. I think, what was that comic strip dog is, remember years ago?
Marduk the
Marmaduke,
dog, yes.
The evil Marmaduke. I said, well, that's not right. But anyway, so good morning to you, Dr. Graves. How's it there in Canada?
Oh, we had a little snow last night, but we'd lost all of our snow. So we have it back. After Christmas, we had a big storm, and now we've got some more back. So it's feeling more like Canada right now.
Because down here in New Mexico, we've had some 15-degree mornings, 12-degree mornings. Unfortunately, people's pipes are breaking a little bit, but nothing like what's going on in California. Is the exact opposite over there. But to get back on the subject, you're going to talk about Evil-Merodach from Babylon. And so if you got a PowerPoint, I'm ready. I'm set up over here.
So we're going to be talking about Evil-Merodach or Merodach. It's actually Evil-Merodach. I've entitled it Jehoiachin Honored, and we'll see the relevance of that in a few moments. This is a tablet where his name is mentioned, a poem, and he's mentioned in this. It's in the British Museum, and there's an image of what he may have looked like. We're looking at the 7 Babylonians that are mentioned in the Bible. So we've looked at Merodach Baladan II. Nabopolassar is not mentioned in the scripture, but we did look at him because he was next in succession, the father of Nebuchadnezzar II. And then we looked at 3 of the officials in Nebuchadnezzar's household. And then we have Merodach, Evil-Merodach we're looking at today. And we'll look at next week Belshazzar, the son and co-regent of Nabonidus. In the timeline, we would place him around 562 to 556 BC. So Evil-Merodach had various names that we encounter. This tablet on the right, the poem called The Lament of Jeioachin, is believed to be the name for Evil-Merodach. He's only mentioned twice in scripture, 2 Kings 25, 27 to 30, and in a parallel passage in Jeremiah 52, verses 31 to 34. Here's a brick with his name on it that's found in the Berlin Museum. It was discovered by Robert Caldaway, and this is where he discovered it. So it's the remains of the palace at Babylon where Nebuchadnezzar and Evil-Merodach would have ruled from. In the Bible, he's referred to as Evil-Merodach, a transliteration from the Hebrew. There's the Hebrew there. While in the Babylonian records, he's known as Amel-Marduk or Awil-Marduk, meaning the man of Marduk. Now, Marduk, of course, was one of the gods of the Babylonians, and that's where his name comes from. But the Hebrew is just transliterated the pronunciation of the name as they would hear it, Awil-Marduk. This reflects the adaptation of the names, of course, in different cultures and different languages. He was the son of Nebuchadnezzar II, the 3rd emperor of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, ruled until his overthrow, and then he was murdered in 560 BC. So folks weren't happy with his rule, and they ended up murdering him. as I said, the successor of Nebuchadnezzar II. On account of the small number of surviving cuneiform sources, there's not a lot known about him, apart from what we learn, of course, in scripture. This tablet here on the right, the lament of Jehoiachin, and that's what we believe to be one of his Babylonian names, the son of Nebuchadnezzar II in custody, makes an appeal to the god Marduk, and so he's thought to be the crown prince and future king, Evil-Merodach or Evil-Merodach. The most notable mention of him, of course, is in 2 Kings 25 and Jeremiah 52, where he frees Jehoiachin, who is the king of Judah, releases him from imprisonment in Babylon after 37 different years. And this act of clemency is significant as it contrasts with the harsh policies of his father, Nebuchadnezzar, toward the Judean captives. So Evil-Merodach not only released Jehoiachin, so he honors him by seating him above the other captive kings in Babylon at that particular time. And then he provides him with royal garments and ensures him a prominent seat at the king's table where he could sit and eat with the king for the rest of his life. So this suggests a possible shift in the Babylonians' policy toward the Judean exiles, and this may have led possibly to his murder, or it may have just been some personal compassion on his part to Evil-Merodach. But either way, it appears that his court didn't like him, and he ended up getting murdered and being replaced. So this may have been the reason for it. But again, we don't have a lot of information. We don't have a lot of tablets, so we don't know a lot about his reign and his rule like we do many of the other kings from the Babylonian chronicles that give us those backgrounds and that information. So his legacy. Evil-Merodach is not a major figure in the historical accounts outside of the biblical passages I mentioned. His short reign and lack of significant achievements or reforms mean that he largely remembered through the biblical accounts rather than the wider historical impact that he had at this time. So that's kind of my survey of Evil-Merodach and his rise to power, and then his death and his significant accomplishment that's mentioned in scripture of freeing Jehoiachin from prison and giving him a prominent place at the table with the king of Babylon. Okay, George.
Well, that's interesting that, like he was captive, and then later on, like you said, there's a different viewpoint, seems like a political agenda being expressed, probably kind of indirectly, because I never picked that up until you just said it right now, that maybe this is what caused some of the trouble, where he's not that well known in history, and also there's not a lot of cuneiform tablets that talk about his activities. But he did get his name in the Bible. I can't say that about myself.
Well, what's kind of interesting is that you remember that a lot of the Egyptian pharaohs had their names erased by their successors because they wanted to kind of erase their achievements, kind of etch them out of history. A little bit like what might be happening today with the presidential election.
Oh, you would bring that up, would you? That you are Canadian.
I am Canadian, but I've seen a few of the cartouches where they try and etch the name of the previous ruler in Egypt out of the cartouche. In this particular case, maybe the reason we don't have as many of these tablets about Evil-Merodach is because they wanted to try and erase him. Remember, Akhenaten
Yes.
it brought a change with the worship of just one god, and the other Egyptians didn't like that. And so they tried to erase his name out of history. And so perhaps there's been a shift now with Evil-Merodach. May not have been so evil for Judah, and raising the king of Judah, releasing him from prison and putting him at a high place of honor at the table That may have angered some of the Babylonians and why they may have destroyed the tablets. We don't have records of him now, but he's mentioned favorably, of course, in the biblical record in Jeremiah and Kings. So that's a little bit of argument from silence, but I think it's a fairly plausible theory. That's my hypothesis, and I'll stick to it.
Well, it makes sense. Like you said, now, of course, this being a channel on archaeology, we got to be careful not to enter into any politics. But when we look at archaeology and kind of like you're saying, Egyptian politics, where we have Hatshepsut, and then her co-regent. Later, I don't know if it was him or not, but definitely it was part of the Egyptian culture. I imagine that I'm not an Egyptologist, but we know that certain embarrassments, at least to them, what they would call it embarrassments, are erased. And one would be, like you said, Akhenaten, but also King Tut was erased. They used Akhenaten's bricks that he built. What was it? The Armana, the city of Armana. They were used as filler. And as those buildings fell apart, they found the inside of the structure that gave it some stability. Were the bricks from Akhenaten's city? So unfortunately, they actually preserved them.
Right.
And they were able to put it together. I say Egyptologists were able to assemble a lot of it together like a great big crossword puzzle to give us more knowledge of that time period. And of course, the tomb of King Tut, and what was hidden and supposedly very tiny. Because of that, you could say it's insignificant to the Egyptians. Later on, it's found. So it is interesting that they do try to remove certain embarrassments from history, at least their
Now,
history.
what's significant is that we have many of the Babylonian chronicles that tell the story, of course, of all the previous and successive kings of Babylon. But this particular fellow, we don't have a lot of that material that has survived for whatever reasons. That may have just been, haphazard, or it may have been on purpose. So we
Right.
just don't know. But I'm suspecting because he had such a kind posture to the king of Judah at this time, releasing him from prison. Again, he's in prison, so that was something that the Babylons they weren't kind to the Judean nation. But now there's a turn of the relationship, and so that may correlate to the reason why we have such a lack of tablets that to relate to his reign. So it's theory, it's speculation, but I think it's a fairly arguable argument that I can make.
That would be an interesting side study for everybody out there to find out if there are different types of political alignments at that time period that were trying to be made for whatever reason, trade, financial, marrying between different types of, you could say, families of dignities, and kings and queens, to see what caused it. Also, political agendas are very seldom just out of complete kindness. But that's a good point. I never realized that in the biblical narrative that, so why did that happen? Why does he come from what they're calling a prison and now he's sitting at the king's table? There's got to be a reason for that.
And the fact that we have him so prominently mentioned in Scripture and highlighted in Scripture as being pro-Judah, and the fact that we have so few of the tablets, when we have lots of tablets from the other emperors that reigned during that time period, I think is related, and there's a connection between those two facts.
Yeah. I wonder if they were having problems with the Egyptians and if they had an alliance with Judah it would help to guard the southern trade route, as keep them, slow the Egyptians down if they tried to move north for whatever reason and take over that trade route. The Levant, which we have Gezer and Lachish, and of course Megiddo and Hatzor, and places where would create a lot of revenue for those that are in charge.
Yes.
But that's interesting. I'm glad you brought that up, Dr. Graves. That's a very important part that we look into in like some smaller details, what's going on underneath that particular event in the biblical narrative, where we just say, oh, wasn't that nice of the king that now they're all buddies? It's
Yeah,
probably not exactly the case.
I'm not an Egyptologist, but it would be great to talk to someone who's an Egyptologist about this. And I never really drilled down in the materials of people like Kenneth Kitchen or Doug Petrovich or Egyptologists to see if there's some kind of a connection there with the Egyptians, what kind of treaties were happening at this particular time. Who knows? This may, it could be a PhD dissertation for someone in the future.
Hey, you never know. You never know. It's just like now, last week I had that little Persian coin that was from the 4th century, I believe. It's like, and it had what the numismatic expert, Mr. David Hendon, suggested was the walls of Jerusalem. And so why is that prominent on a coin? So I think sometimes there's a connection, like the coin set on the reverse of it, beyond the river. And then it shows the walls of a city. What's that, Jerusalem? Well, it's like we said last week. Some experts say that possibly the wall that Ezra and Nehemiah rebuilt, fortifying the city. And of course, through alliances, and maybe it's kind of interesting that something's going on in this biblical text, that there's more attention being paid to the Judean king. Maybe you could say, well, look how nice he's treating us back in Babylon, and the word gets down to Jerusalem. Yeah, who knows? But anyway.
Well, there's certainly a shift in the diplomatic relationships now between Judah and Babylon that takes place under Evil-Merodach's reign. That's very evident in the biblical text.
Right.
We'll pick up a little bit more when we talk next week about Belshazzar and Daniel, and as things move along, and maybe we'll be able to put a few of these puzzle pieces together and make more sense of it next week.
Well, absolutely. Let's see what else we got going on. We still are doing recordings about Explorers of the Lost Vault to make everybody aware of that. And let's see, I got some small clips. We'll just call them shorts going on, so they last around maybe 45 seconds. And I know you just edited one. Dr. Graves actually makes the cover slides for these. And we have a number of them that are going to be coming up. I think I got 4 that I got written up, and I'm going to put some, like Holly at Bible Interacts, one of the editors. She's going to be busy messing with the shorts that I'm doing. I think I got a total. I'm closing on around 30 shorts now. I haven't been doing them that long, but just to make people aware of it. It's not a lot of time to be invested. And doctor, as you know, some of them have a little bit of humor. I got my son, he's dressed up in a mummy outfit. You can see I got the coffin right here, and we do make a small point, and it's fun and it's quick. It's like I said, it's only 46 seconds. If you enjoy that kind of stuff, there you go. It's biblical archaeology from the ground down, or it can also be titled under Bible Interact because they're the sponsor, and then it'll be the title. So what was the last one you did? The last the slides you did? I know I'm putting
The
you
last
on the
one
spot.
I did was on a mummy. Your son taking over your chair, which I thought quite humorous and entertaining. So that was well done.
Yeah. I don't want to ruin it for people. That's cool. I get my son involved because and one time he was dressed up like Indiana Jones. and
Okay.
it was a small. It goes from advertisements to a short because advertisements got to be short, but once they're done being an advertisement, then they become the short, right? And this one was introducing people to some figures in the past, and it was Roy Chapman Andrews. And Roy Chapman Andrews was one of the first to actually explore in the Gobi Desert, and he actually found dinosaur eggs in their nest. And he brought them back to the United States and put them on show. And this is about, I think it's back in the 1920s, 1930s. So with that, a lot of people forget because it's so far in the past. But some, you can say, film critics have suggested that the character Indiana Jones was taken after the personality and the events that happened in the life of Roy Chapman Andrews. So we make that comparison. So everybody, if you're interested in that, that's out there too. I think
But
it's
a
what's that?
fine point that needs to be made is that we're dealing with archaeology,
Mhm.
not dinosaurs. That's a totally
Not
different
dinosaurs,
field.
but that was more of an explorer. But you know what? A lot of that early, what we might think of early biblical, it's called biblical archaeology, early on was just a lot of exploring, almost like treasure hunting.
Or looting.
Well, I wasn't going to say that.
A lot of nationalism. I deal with that in my book on the history of biblical archaeology. Folks can have a look at that if they wanted to read a little bit more detail about how things have developed from the
Mhm.
time of the looting to nationalism and when the museums like the Louvre and the British Museum were created.
Then they fought over the Rosetta Stone for a while, didn't they?
But you know that it was actually a personal collection that became the British Museum.
I think early on, yes.
Yep. Yeah. So
Mhm.
I have some photographs of his house and some of the artifacts, like the giraffe that's standing in the foyer. It was a stuffed giraffe that they had put in there, and so quite an interesting development of how the British Museum came about, and the difference between the Louvre and the British Museum. You used to have to pay to get into the British Museum, and the Louvre was free. Now it's the opposite. The British Museum is free, and you got to pay to get in the Louvre. So the race for having the most artifacts and the most spectacular, how that all developed, I deal with that in the history of British biblical archaeology. It's the
So
book that it's the book that's out, the furthest one there on the end.
okay,
But I'll post a photograph of it up there so that folks can see
okay.
it.
When you edit,
Yeah.
okay. Let me
Anyway,
ask you a question. When do you think archaeology? Well, I'm going to just say archaeology. When do you think archaeology switched from exploring a treasure hunt to actually academics, where there's academics to this archaeology?
well, probably the first archaeologist goes way back to the Babylonians, because there was a
Uh,
Babylonian king who was a collector of cuneiform tablets and actually set up his own museum.
I don't. I'm going to be honest here because I hate to admit my ignorance, but who is he? I don't know.
I think we'll be talking about him possibly next week.
Oh, okay. So we're not going to give it up. All right. All right. Okay. Besides that guy, who else?
Well, when everything goes back, probably the first site that was, scientific archaeologically excavated was Pompeii and Herculaneum. And those were done by the
Okay, really?
Italians. And then you go back earlier than that, and most of them were sort of looters and collectors of artifacts and items. And they would pretty much rape a site, take everything out of it. Then it began to become more and more scientifically developed over time. But in my book, I deal with Henry Layard.
Hmm.
Some of them were diplomats. in the ancient Near East at the time, and on the weekends they would go out and do some scavenging around these ancient sites to pick up stuff. And so there's quite a development to it.
So when do you think they actually, like we have time sequence dating of pottery. When does that start? Where we can say, oh, that's Middle Bronze Age pottery, or that's Late Bronze Age pottery, that's Iron Age pottery. When did they start to develop that sequence of dating?
No, that was really the creation of Sir Flinders Petrie. And he was the guy that began to compare pottery from a site in Egypt called Tallahassee. And he compared it with a site that he was working on in Israel, and was able to transfer what he found in Egypt with what he found now in Israel. And then he was able to compare the dating based on the scarabs that he found to help him date the pharaohs in Egypt. So he knew this style of pottery was at a certain particular point in Egypt. And then he compared that to the type of pottery that he was finding in Israel. And then he began to label it all and document it all and look at the different strata. So Sir Flinders Petrie has become the father of modern archaeology, really, and modern Egyptology.
So what would that date to at the turn of the
Yeah, you're going to
20th
ask me
century?
dates.
Huh?
I said,
Don't
you're going to
ask a
ask
date.
me dates, and
Okay,
I don't do
didn't ask you
dates.
a date.
I look them up in my book.
Oh, I see. You're trying to sell us a book. Hmm.
I'll post a photograph of him, one of my plates that'll have his dates on it. But I don't try to.
I'm just kidding. If you want to show us what book would give us that kind of answer, that'd be great.
Yep, it's all there in the books, and I don't try to remember them all. I work on the Einstein principle.
You told me that one.
Yeah, I'll remind our listeners. Einstein was once asked how many feet there were in a mile, and he says, "I learned a long time ago. I don't know. I don't clog my mind up with things I can look up in a book in 5 minutes. So you can look it up in my book in 5 minutes."
I think that would be different for the individual because actually right now my son is 14 and his feet are bigger than mine.
Well, today people will just Google it or ask AI to do it. So you just have to ask Grok, and he'll give you all the dates on Sir Flinders Petrie.
Well, that's true. What the heck? All right, so we'll wrap up the program with that, a little bit of past archaeology. And we were talking about the evil Babylonian king, but not so evil for the land of Judah. Interesting enough. Was there some political agenda behind his kindness to the biblical king that was held captive for, what, 34 years? Was it?
I don't think it was the Judahites that would have actually called him evil. It sounds to me like this was a name that stuck based on his Babylonian friends
Right?
or
What can you
family.
say? It's an old political statement where you keep your friends close, but your enemies closer.
Yes, that's right.
All right. Well, that's the end of today's program. Thanks for tuning in. We are now around 179,000 subscribers. Thanks to everybody out there. So have a great day. Doctor, you also have a great day. Thanks for tuning in and filling us in and using your PowerPoint that I know you work very hard on. And everybody have a great day. It's for us Americans, it's a inauguration day, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's the 20th. What a good day for us.
Good
All right.
day.
All right.
Talk to you
Thanks for
later.
your time, doctor. And everybody, you have a good day too. Thanks for your time.